Face the prospect of rising prices, a shortage of supply and a scramble to find that perfect property.
But that situation could be changing, at least in some areas. And property expert Andrew Wilson joins us now from Melbourne. Andrew, it's been so tough for renters these past few years, especially in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. What's the situation now, and can you perhaps give us a breakdown city by city?
Well, look, things are certainly improving in that Sydney market. You know, those long queues of tenants looking for vacant properties are just narrowing a little bit now. There's more choices of properties. Vacancy rates are higher than they were a year ago in Sydney. And who would have believed that vacancy rates in Sydney now are higher than Brisbane? Because Brisbane's moved the other way. Its rental markets are tightening. Not so good news in the other capital city markets. Melbourne's still a very tough market for tenants. So is Adelaide. And of course, Perth's been an underperformer in terms of lower rents and higher vacancy rates for the last 4 or 5 years. In fact, rents in Perth are at 10-year plus lows. But look, some good news there in Sydney. Vacancy rates are certainly rising, but Sydney still has the highest rents in the country. We'd need to see vacancy rates really pushing up towards 3% before we had any rental relief. But we are seeing rising rents in Melbourne, which isn't good news, and also in Adelaide. And I think that you know, even though Brisbane's still good value for tenants with mid 2% vacancy rates, if that trend continues, we may see some increases in rents over the medium term in Brisbane. So look, at least some better news there if you're looking to rent a property in Sydney. More choice and perhaps the prospect of lower rents.
So what's caused the change?
Well, look, it's interesting, and people, of course, are the key drivers of rental markets. We've seen a surge in first-home buyer numbers in Victoria and New South Wales over the last year. First-home buyer numbers in New South Wales are up by about 80%, and of course that takes demand away from rental properties. We're also seeing an easing in net migration into New South Wales. Although it's still strong, it's not at the levels it was a year ago. And of course in Sydney we're seeing the peak of the new supply for apartments particularly. So we're getting a lot more supply into the market right now. And that means of course that you know, rental properties are becoming more available. There are more choices. Vacancy rates are rising. Still a little bit of way to go before we see those rents come down. But you know, it is much better being a prospective tenant in Sydney now than it has been for a couple of years. Still pretty tough in the other markets.
So Andrew, if someone was looking to rent for the first time or perhaps even move, what's your advice to get the best deal?
Well, look, I think it's interesting that, you know, all things being equal, landlords are starting to look more at secure tenancies rather than getting the most out of a particular tenant in terms of the highest rent. I think tenants should start to look at projecting that they're there for the longer term, focus on a longer lease and, you know, let it be known that they're there for a longer term commitment. And I think that resonates with landlords who are more interested in a long-term relationship rather than sort of squeezing the last drop of rent they can out of tenants.
Good on you. Yeah, there you go.
Because you haven't heard much good news for renters over the past few years. So we know here in Sydney how ridiculous rental properties prices have been. So thank you, Andrew, for that update.
Thank you, guys.
News time now. Here's